Empires were at war. Stars burned, planets fell, and whole fleets turned to dust in the silence of space. For years, two mighty empires had fought across the galaxy. Their battles left scars that could be seen from orbit, worlds shattered, moons cracked, and trade routes littered with wreckage. They were ancient rivals, each believing themselves destined to rule the stars. But now, both had reached a point where war had cost too much. Armies were exhausted, treasuries drained, and the people of both sides whispered of rebellion. Something had to change. And so, a council was called. A meeting unlike any before. The greatest hall of negotiation, built on a station at the edge of neutral space, was prepared. Delegates from across the galaxy came to witness it. The fate of billions rested on what would happen inside those walls. But when the names of the negotiators were announced, one name shocked them all. Not a general. Not a king. Not a warlord. It was a human. One single human. Many laughed at first. Humans were a young species, newcomers to the galactic stage. They had no empire, no fleets, no ancient bloodlines. Compared to the towering reptilian dynasties, or the insectoid hives that stretched across entire systems, humans were nothing. Fragile creatures from a blue world orbiting an average sun. And yet, the Council had chosen one of them to mediate between two civilizations that had fought for 1,000 years. The question spread like fire. Why? Some said the Council wanted a neutral voice. Others whispered that humans were too small to be feared, and so both empires would accept them as harmless. A few, however, believed something else, that humans had a strange power, not of weapons, not of ships, but of words. When the day arrived, the hall was filled with shadows and light. Rows of long seats curved around the central floor, where the negotiation would take place. Massive banners hung from the ceiling, glowing with alien symbols. The air was heavy, charged with tension. Generals in armored suits sat beside diplomats in flowing robes, each eyeing the other with hatred barely hidden behind formal masks. And then she walked in. The only human in the room. Her steps were steady, though every face turned to her as if to pierce through her. Some were cold and judging, others openly mocking. She was small compared to the towering figures around her. Her uniform was simple, black with a silver crest, no weapons, no armor. Her only weapon was her presence. She carried no guards. She needed none. Whispers began to ripple across the chamber. This is the one. A human. They send a child to face empires. Laughter, low and cruel, echoed from the higher seats. One reptilian warlord leaned to his advisor and hissed, "This is an insult. Does the council mock us?" But the human did not flinch. Her eyes scanned the room, calm and sharp, like a soldier reading a battlefield. She took in every detail, the guards at the doors, the nervous shuffling of minor delegates, the way the two opposing empires sat facing each other like predators ready to strike. She saw fear, pride, rage, and desperation. She saw it all in a heartbeat, and she smiled. She walked to the central chair, a single seat placed between the two delegations. She sat down slowly, folding her hands on the table, and waited. She said nothing at first. That silence cut deeper than any word. The mocking voices faded. The laughter stopped. Even the banners seemed to hang heavier in the still air. For the first time in years, both empires stared at something other than each other. They stared at her. The reptilian emperor finally broke the silence, his voice deep and sharp. "Tell us, human, what makes you worthy to sit here?" His words dripped with scorn, but beneath it was curiosity. He wanted to know. The insectoid queen clicked her mandibles and added, "We expected a warrior, a general, perhaps even a god-king. Instead, we see you." Her many eyes glittered with contempt. The human leaned forward, her voice steady, not loud, but clear enough to reach every corner of the hall. "I am not here to prove myself," she said. "I am here because you have failed." Gasps filled the chamber. To speak so boldly to empires that ruled entire sectors was madness. Yet she did not waver. Her words echoed, simple but sharp. "You have fought for centuries. Worlds are ash, fleets are dust, and still, neither of you has won. How many more must die before you admit the truth? This war cannot be won. It can only be ended." The emperor snarled, rising halfway from his seat. His guards moved, but he raised a claw to stop them. His burning eyes studied her. The insectoid queen tilted her head, intrigued despite her disdain. "Bold words," the Emperor said. "But they come from a species that knows nothing of power." The human's smile returned, faint and unreadable. "Perhaps. Or perhaps that is why I was chosen. Because I know what you do not. Because I see what you refuse to see." She let her words linger in the air. Silence stretched again. Some delegates shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned forward, curious now, drawn in despite themselves. It was a dangerous game she played. Alone, without army or fleet, speaking to creatures who could crush her with a gesture. And yet, there was something in her tone that made even the most hardened generals pause. She was not afraid. And that was the most unsettling thing of all. The empires had expected weakness. They had expected begging, flattery, or trembling humility. Instead, they faced calm defiance. They faced a human who looked at them as equals, not monsters. For a moment, the war itself seemed to hang on the edge of her words. But before she could speak again, the great doors at the end of the hall slammed shut. The sound echoed like thunder. All eyes turned as the council's voice filled the chamber. "The negotiations begin now." The human straightened in her chair. The Emperor's claws tapped against the table. The Queen's mandibles clicked in slow rhythm. The hall fell into silence once more. She looked around her, her gaze meeting the eyes of creatures older and stronger than anything her world had ever faced. And she thought of the billions who would never know her name, but whose lives might depend on what she did in this moment. One human, against two empires. The weight of it pressed down on her, but she did not bow. She breathed once, steady, calm. Then she leaned forward and spoke the first words of the negotiation. And in that moment, the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. She sat in the center of the chamber, small compared to the towering figures that surrounded her. The long table stretched out like the spine of some ancient beast, lined with the most powerful beings of two empires. Their bodies gleamed with armor, scales, and chitin, their eyes filled with suspicion, pride, and something else, curiosity. The human silence was unnerving. She had spoken once, boldly, and now she simply waited. The stillness pressed against the walls like a storm about to break. Many of the alien leaders shifted, unused to being ignored, unused to patience being used as a weapon. The Emperor of the Reptilian Empire leaned forward, his scales glinting under the hall's cold lights. His voice rumbled like stone sliding against stone. "You dare lecture us about failure? You, who come from a world with no throne, no empire, no ancient blood. You are nothing. A fragile creature of flesh and bone. And yet you speak to me as if we are equals." The insectoid queen's mandibles clicked in amusement. "Perhaps that is the trick. The council sends us a creature so unthreatening, so laughably weak, that neither side can accuse the other of bias. A pet, dressed in black." Her delegates chittered with cruel laughter, the sound like knives scraping together. The human's eyes moved toward them, calm, steady, unreadable. She let them speak. She let the insults fall around her like rain. She did not rise, did not flinch, did not break eye contact. Her hands remained folded on the table, still as stone. When at last the noise began to fade, she spoke. "I am not here to match your strength," she said, her voice even, her words simple. "Strength has already failed you." The laughter died. The Queen's many eyes narrowed. The Emperor's jaw tightened, a low growl vibrating in his chest. "You fight for pride," she continued. "You fight for history. You fight because you do not know how to stop. And so you burn everything in your path, hoping the other will break first. But you both bleed. You both weaken. You both sink into the same grave." The words carried no threat, no insult. They were observations, plain and cold. Yet in that hall filled with warlords, they cut deeper than any blade. The Emperor slammed a clawed hand against the table, the sound cracking like thunder. "You speak as though you know war." Her eyes met his, and for the first time there was fire behind them. "I do." The chamber stilled. Some delegates frowned, others whispered. A fragile creature from a young species daring to claim knowledge of war? It was absurd. But something in her tone silenced them. She was not boasting. She was remembering. Her voice grew softer, almost quiet, but every ear strained to hear. On my world, wars have burned cities to ash. Families lost. Nations shattered. We have seen the price of pride. We have buried too many to count. And we have learned this: war never ends when the strongest wins. It ends when both sides realize there is nothing left to lose. Her words hung heavy in the air. The delegates shifted again, but this time it was not out of impatience. It was discomfort. Some avoided her gaze. Some frowned, troubled by thoughts they did not wish to admit. The Queen tilted her head slowly, her mandibles clicking in an unfamiliar rhythm. You dare compare your small planet struggles to the glory of our empires? The human's lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile. Glory, she asked softly. Glory does not leave children starving. Glory does not leave fleets drifting in silence. Glory does not turn worlds into graves. If this is your glory, then it is nothing but rot painted in gold. The hall went silent again. Even the banners seemed to sag under the weight of her words. One of the Emperor's generals, a towering figure with jagged scars across his face, rose in anger. His armor clattered as he pointed a claw toward her. She insults us. End this farce now, before it shames us further. The Emperor raised a hand to silence him. His eyes, sharp as blades, stayed locked on the human. There was rage there, yes, but also something else. Something darker. Curiosity. The Queen leaned back in her seat, her mandibles stilling. Her eyes glittered like polished stone. You speak with certainty, human. You speak with boldness. But tell us, why should we listen? Why should we not crush you here and now, and let our fleets decide the future as they always have? For the first time, the human leaned forward. Her hands unfolded, her fingers resting lightly against the cold surface of the table. Her gaze swept across the hall, touching every delegate, every soldier, every silent observer. When she spoke, her voice carried not as a shout, but with the weight of absolute certainty. Because if you kill me, you prove me right. You prove that all you have left is destruction. And destruction is not victory. It is only loss. Her words echoed, bouncing off the walls of the chamber. For a long moment, no one spoke. No one laughed. No one moved. The silence was heavier than any roar of war. And in that silence, something began to shift. Not in the empires themselves, not yet. But in the eyes of those who watched, those who listened, those who had long grown weary of endless blood. A seed was planted, a seed of doubt. The human leaned back in her chair, her calm expression unchanged. She had no army, no weapons, no throne. Only words. And yet, in that vast hall filled with titans, those words felt like the sharpest blade. The night of negotiation had only just begun. The chamber felt colder as the night stretched on. The human remained in her seat, steady, calm, while the empires around her bristled with anger and unease. No one expected her to last this long. No one expected her to speak with such sharpness. Yet she had not faltered. The Emperor leaned back in his chair, his clawed fingers tapping against the armrest. His golden eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the cold light of the chamber. He studied her, as though weighing whether she was a fool, a liar, or something else entirely. The Queen, on the other side, shifted in her seat. Her mandibles clicked slowly, not in anger, but in thought. For a moment, the war between them seemed forgotten. Both of them were watching her. The silence stretched too long, and the human chose her moment. She spoke, not loudly, but with the same calm certainty that had silenced them before. You speak of power. You show your scars, your fleets, your empires. And yet both of you are here, at this table, because you cannot win. Do you know why? Her words made some of the delegates bristle. A general hissed in offense, another slammed a fist against the table. But she did not stop. You believe you are unbreakable. You believe your strength is endless. But I know your secrets. Both of you. The Emperor's head snapped toward her, his jaw tightening. The Queen's eyes narrowed to slits. Whispers rippled across the hall, low and uneasy. The human reached into her case, pulling out a single sheet of thin silver data crystal. She held it up, its surface glowing faintly. I know the truth of your fleets, she said, looking at the Emperor. I know that your last warship found in the Dross system was not destroyed by the enemy, as you claimed. It broke down. It was abandoned. Your supply lines are crumbling. The Emperor's claws dug into the wood of the table, leaving deep grooves. His generals stiffened. Some exchanged uneasy looks. And you, she turned her gaze toward the Queen. Your hive sings of endless unity, perfect obedience. But I have spoken to those who fled your colonies. Your brood is fracturing. Your drones whisper rebellion in the dark. They are tired of fighting your endless wars. They dream of a life beyond your control. The Queen's mandibles froze. For the first time, her polished calm cracked. A low hiss escaped her, sharp and venomous. Lies, she spat. But her voice trembled ever so slightly, and those closest to her seat heard it. The human placed the crystal down on the table. These are not lies. These are facts. Your enemies already know them. Your people already know them. I am only saying what you refuse to speak aloud. The air in the chamber grew thick with unease. The delegates shifted, whispers growing louder. The Emperor's generals looked unsettled. The Queen's drones chittered nervously, their eyes darting toward her. The Emperor finally slammed his fist down, making the table tremble. You dare bring threats into this hall? You dare expose secrets that no outsider should know? His voice boomed like thunder, rattling the walls. The human met his gaze without flinching. I dare speak the truth. And the truth is simple. Neither of you can win this war. If you continue, both your empires will collapse. You will not rule the stars. You will be buried by them. The Queen rose halfway from her seat, her many eyes burning. Enough of this game. You come here with no army, no fleet, no throne. You have nothing but words, human. Words do not conquer. Words do not save. Words do not rule. The human leaned forward, her calm expression unshaken. Words decide whether your people live or die. Words build peace or summon war. Words will decide your future here, tonight, whether you admit it or not. Her voice carried across the hall, sharp, clear, undeniable. Every delegate, every soldier, every servant in that chamber felt the weight of it. She had no weapons. She had no army. But with every sentence, she cut through the pride of empires like a blade through glass. The Emperor stared at her, his jaw clenched, his claws digging into the table. The Queen's mandibles twitched with restrained fury. For the first time in centuries, both rulers were forced into silence. The human's words had done what no fleet, no weapon, no battle could. They had forced two empires to listen. And yet, beneath that silence, danger stirred. The Emperor's generals whispered of treachery. The Queen's drones clicked in warning. The tension rose like a storm pressing against the walls. One wrong word, one false step, and the negotiation would collapse into blood. But the human only smiled faintly, as if she knew she had drawn them into her game. A dangerous game, one where every sentence was a weapon, and every pause a blade held to the throat of giants. The night was far from over. The chamber's air felt heavier as the hours dragged on. The human had spoken truths that struck like arrows, and the wounds they left were not easily ignored. The Emperor's generals whispered among themselves, their golden eyes darting with unease. The Queen's drones shifted restlessly, their chittering a sign of agitation that none dared voice aloud. The delegates, who had come expecting a spectacle of power, now leaned forward, caught in the web of her words. She sat still, her hands folded on the table once more. Her expression was calm, but her eyes carried a sharpness that made even the boldest hesitate before meeting her gaze. Silence filled the chamber, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of blades drawn, waiting for someone to strike first. At last, the Emperor rose to his full height, towering above her. His scales shimmered like black steel beneath the chamber lights, his claws gleaming. His voice rumbled deep, like thunder shaking the earth. You speak of truths, human, but truths are nothing without strength. I could crush you now, and no fleet from your fragile world could save you. Your words would vanish, and the galaxy would remember nothing. The human's eyes lifted to him, unflinching. Her voice was calm, almost quiet. If you kill me, you will only prove to your people that you fear the truth. And fear spreads faster than fire. A murmur rippled across the hall. Delegates exchanged uneasy looks. Some of the Emperor's generals frowned, others stiffened as if struck. For a moment, the Emperor froze, his hand hovering in the air as though caught between pride and caution. His nostrils flared, his chest rising with barely controlled fury. The Queen's mandibles clicked in a sharp rhythm, a sound of dark amusement. She leaned forward, her many eyes glinting. "Do you see, Emperor? Even a human knows your weakness. Your throne shakes, your fleets falter. Perhaps your empire is nothing but a hollow shell." The Emperor's head snapped toward her, his eyes blazing. "And you, insect, who hides behind endless drones. Tell me, how many of your broods have deserted you? How many whisper rebellion while you pretend to be unbroken?" The Queen hissed, rising half from her seat. Her drones stirred, their spindly limbs twitching. The air grew tense, thick with the promise of violence. The chamber guards tightened their grips on their weapons, ready to intervene if blood was spilled. But the humans spoke again, cutting through the noise like a blade. "You both sit here, desperate to appear strong. But strength is not what brought you to this table. Failure did. You are here because your people can no longer bear the cost of your pride. You are here because the war is killing you both." Her words rang with finality. The laughter and jeers that had greeted her earlier were gone. In their place was anger, yes, but also something far more dangerous, unease. Neither side wanted to admit she was right, but neither could dismiss her. The Emperor turned back to her slowly, his teeth bared in a grim snarl. "And what would you have us do, human? Bow to one another? Share the galaxy like children with a broken toy?" His voice dripped with venom, but beneath it was the echo of a genuine question. The human's eyes narrowed. "You can bow now, or you can fall later. But either way, you will kneel." The words struck the chamber like a lightning bolt. Gasps echoed, some in shock, some in fury. A few of the delegates shouted at once, their voices clashing. "Insult! Blasphemy! She mocks the thrones!" One of the Emperor's generals roared, slamming his armored fist onto the table. "Enough! She dares to command us like slaves. End this farce now." His claws scraped against the edge of the table, sparks flying. His voice rose louder than the others, his fury shaking the air. "No human speaks to my Emperor this way and lives." He drew his weapon in a flash of steel. The hall erupted in chaos. Guards rushed forward, drones hissed, delegates rose to their feet in alarm. The Queen's mandibles clicked furiously, her drones forming a protective wall. The Emperor's hand shot up, ordering restraint, but the general's rage was not so easily quelled. He stepped toward the human, weapon raised. His golden eyes blazed with fury. The chamber's light gleamed along the curve of the blade. The human did not move. Her gaze locked on his, unshaken, unafraid. Her voice, soft but unyielding, cut through the storm. "Strike me, and you prove my words. Strike me, and the galaxy will see your empire for what it truly is, fearful, desperate, broken." The general froze mid-step. His weapon trembled in his hand, the fury in his eyes meeting the stillness in hers. Around him, whispers grew louder. Delegates stared. Even his fellow generals looked uneasy, their eyes betraying doubt. The Emperor's growl rumbled through the chamber. "Stand down." The general hesitated, his chest heaving with rage. But the Emperor's gaze burned into him like fire, and slowly, with a hiss of fury, he lowered his weapon. The chamber guards moved closer, surrounding him until he stepped back into his place. The human's calm remained unbroken. Her eyes turned to the Queen, then back to the Emperor. "You see, you are already prisoners of your own fear. You roar like beasts, but your power crumbles in silence." The Queen hissed, her mandibles scraping against each other. "Do not think your games make you master here, human. You play with fire, and fire consumes." The human's faint smile returned. "Fire consumes, yes. But it also reveals what is strong enough to endure." Her words lingered, hanging in the air like smoke after a battle. The Emperor sat slowly, his claws tapping against the table once more. His eyes burned with fury, but beneath it was a glimmer of something he could not hide, respect or perhaps fear. The Queen leaned back, her mandibles still clicking, her thoughts unreadable. The chamber grew quiet again, but it was not the quiet of peace. It was the quiet of two predators forced to recognize that something had shifted. The human had drawn blood without raising a weapon. She had turned their fury into hesitation. The negotiation had not ended. It had only begun to cut deeper. And as the night stretched on, the weight of her presence pressed harder on the two empires. She was no longer a guest at the table. She was the blade between them. The chamber was restless. The storm that had nearly broken into violence now simmered beneath the surface, invisible yet heavy in every breath, every whisper. The human remained still, seated at the center of it all, her calmness unnatural in a room where empires once roared like beasts. She had spoken truths that could not be unsaid. She had planted doubts that could not be pulled from the minds of those who heard them. The emperor leaned forward, his claws pressed against the table, his eyes blazing with anger. Yet his words were not aimed at her. They were aimed at his own generals, who sat silent, their earlier fury cooled into unease. "She is nothing," he hissed, his voice sharp enough to cut stone. "A fragile creature of a fragile species. Do not let her words infect you. Do not forget who you serve." But the general who had raised his blade earlier would not meet his emperor's eyes. His head bowed, his claws clenched tight, but his silence was more dangerous than any outburst. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. For the first time in centuries, the emperor's command did not feel absolute. The queen's mandibles clicked in slow amusement. She leaned back, her many eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Do you hear it, Emperor? Even your own doubt you. They listen to her. They feel the weakness you try so hard to bury. Perhaps your empire is already broken." The emperor turned his head sharply toward her, his scales rippling as his muscles tensed. "Do not mistake a spark for a flame. My empire has crushed greater threats than this." The human's voice slipped between them, quiet but sharp. "It is not the greater threats that destroy empires. It is the cracks inside them. The whispers in the dark. The doubts of men who once believed their leaders unshakable." The emperor's golden eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, fury and fear warred within him. His claws dug deeper into the table's surface, leaving long scars in the polished stone. Around the chamber, the whispers grew louder. Delegates from neutral worlds leaned toward each other, muttering in low voices. Generals stared at the human with eyes that no longer burned only with hatred, but with a strange uncertainty. Even the drones of the queen clicked uneasily, their hive minds unsettled by the ripple of instability they sensed. The human did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Every word carried weight, and every pause left room for fear to grow. "You call yourselves empires, rulers of countless stars. But your stars burn dim. Your fleets fall apart. Your people whisper rebellion. And all the while, you sit here pretending that pride can feed the hungry or rebuild the dead." A murmur spread through the emperor's side of the chamber. One of his advisors, an aged reptilian with silvered scales, shifted in his seat. His voice, usually firm, trembled as he spoke. "My emperor, perhaps there is wisdom in what she says. Our losses have grown too heavy. Our soldiers are weary." The emperor's head snapped toward him, his eyes blazing with fury. "Silence!" The word cracked through the hall like thunder. The advisor flinched, bowing his head, but the words had already been spoken. They could not be erased. They lingered in the air like smoke after fire. The human's eyes followed the exchange, her expression unreadable. She spoke softly, almost as if to herself, but the words carried to every corner of the chamber. "Even your most loyal see what you refuse to see. The cracks are already there. You cannot silence them forever." The emperor's chest heaved with fury. He wanted to roar, to strike, to end the insult that sat calmly before him. But he did not. He could not. Every eye in the chamber was on him, watching not just his power, but his weakness. And weakness, once seen, could never be hidden again. The queen leaned forward, her mandibles twitching with delight. "Your empire bleeds, Emperor. It bleeds from within. And soon, it will bleed out." Her words drew a hiss of approval from her drones, but even as they echoed her scorn, the queen's own calm began to falter. She saw it too, the way her rival's generals shifted, the way the emperor's mask cracked. If it could happen to him, it could happen to her. The human turned her gaze on the queen. Her eyes were steady, her voice quiet but merciless. And you are no different. Your drones obey because they are bound to you. But even in the hive, there are whispers. Whispers of freedom. Whispers of life without endless war. They will not say it where you can hear, but they think it. They dream it. And dreams spread faster than chains. The queen's mandibles froze. Her eyes narrowed, her many hands tightening on the armrests of her throne. You know nothing of the hive, she hissed, but the sharpness of her tone betrayed her. The human leaned back, her hands folding once again. I know enough. Enough to see the cracks. Enough to know they will grow. Empires do not fall when enemies strike them down. They fall when their own people no longer believe. The words sank deep into the chamber. Some delegates nodded, their faces shadowed with thought. Others frowned, unwilling to accept, yet unable to deny the truth they had heard. The tension shifted, no longer between the two empires, but between rulers and their own. The emperor sat slowly, his claws still trembling against the table. His voice was low, a growl edged with rage and fear. You think you can break us with words, human. But words do not win wars. Her gaze locked on his, sharp as steel. No. But words end them. And that is why you fear me. The chamber grew still. The whispers faded. Even the restless drones quieted. For a moment, there was nothing but silence and the steady heartbeat of tension pressing against every soul in the hall. The emperor's generals exchanged uneasy glances. The queen's drones shifted uncomfortably, their chittering broken and uneven. The delegates, once entertained by the human's boldness, now looked at her with something closer to awe, or perhaps dread. She had walked into a hall filled with giants. She had no army, no weapons, no throne. Yet in a single night, she had drawn blood from empires without ever lifting a blade. And somewhere deep within the cracks of those empires, the seeds of collapse had begun to grow. The human did not smile, but her eyes carried the quiet certainty of someone who knew the battle was turning. She did not need to win by force. She only needed to let the empires destroy themselves. The night of negotiation pressed on, but already, the first empire had begun to break. The chamber had grown colder as the hours passed. The light from the high vaulted windows had faded into the pale glow of distant stars, and now only the soft hum of the hall's energy conduits kept the silence from swallowing everything whole. What began as a negotiation had turned into something else entirely. No longer were the two empires roaring against one another. They sat in uneasy quiet, their rulers stiff and restless, their generals tense, their advisers whispering in hushed tones that carried more fear than anger. The human had not moved much. She sat in her place, calm and unshaken, her posture straight, her eyes steady. It was her stillness that unnerved them most. No panic. No weakness. Only the weight of words already spoken and the promise of more to come. The emperor's generals spoke among themselves in low voices. The scales along their necks twitched, a sign of unease. One leaned closer to another, whispering words the emperor pretended not to hear. If she is right, if the people doubt already, what happens when we return? His fellow did not answer, but his silence was louder than any reply. Across from them, the queen's drones shifted, their mandibles clicking nervously. Even a hive could feel fear, though they tried to mask it behind their queen's authority. Yet the queen herself could not mask her unease. Her many eyes followed the human carefully now, no longer filled with disdain but with something more cautious, something bordering on respect she would never admit aloud. The human finally spoke, her voice soft, yet it reached every corner of the chamber. You feel it now, don't you? The silence of your soldiers. The hesitation of your advisers. You fear the moment when you leave this hall and find that your power is not as absolute as you believed. The emperor's claws dug into the armrest of his seat. He wanted to shout, to tear apart the fragile figure before him, but each time he thought to do so, he saw the way his generals avoided his gaze, the way his advisers whispered with doubt. He could silence her, yes. But he could not silence them. Not anymore. The queen leaned forward, her voice sharp, her mandibles clacking. You think fear is weakness. But fear binds. My drones know their place. My hive does not dream of rebellion. The human's gaze turned to her, calm and cutting. Fear binds only until it breaks. And when it breaks, it shatters everything. Even a hive can crack. Even loyalty can turn. The queen's mandibles froze. She opened her mouth to reply, but no words came. Deep within her mind, connected to thousands of drones, she felt the faintest ripple, tiny, almost invisible, yet present. Doubt. A thought not of war, not of obedience, but of weariness. She crushed it immediately, forcing the hive to silence. But the fact it had surfaced at all was enough to unsettle her. The silence grew heavier. No one dared break it. The weight of the humans' words hung over them like a shadow, pressing into their chests. Then a voice broke through, not hers, not a ruler's, but one of the neutral delegates seated at the edge of the chamber. His voice was thin, shaking, but the courage it took to speak was undeniable. Perhaps it is true. Perhaps we have allowed pride to blind us while galaxies burn. If one human can see it so clearly, why can't we? The Emperor turned sharply, his glare enough to silence the delegate instantly. But the damage was done. The words had been spoken aloud, and now they echoed in every mind. Another delegate muttered agreement. Then another. Soon the low murmur spread, soft but unstoppable. Whispers of truth, of fear, of change. They carried through the hall, and both empires could hear them. The human sat in silence, watching. She did not need to add more. The empires were doing her work for her now. Doubt spread like cracks in glass, thin at first, but deepening with every second. The Emperor leaned back in his seat, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. For the first time in his reign, he felt something he had never allowed himself to feel before. The weight of fear, not of an enemy's fleet or a rival's army, but of his own people. The queen's eyes narrowed, her hands tightening on her throne. She, too, felt the shift, though she tried to bury it beneath her pride. Yet in the hive's collective hum, the faint ripple remained. A tremor that would not vanish. The hall was no longer a place of negotiation. It had become a battlefield of shadows and fear. And in that battlefield, the human did not need armies or fleets. She only needed patience. The empires were unraveling themselves. The night deepened, and with it, the silence. Neither empire dared speak of surrender, not yet. But the thought had already been born, and it was growing in every corner of their minds. The human sat quietly, her eyes steady, waiting for dawn. The night stretched long, and the weight of silence pressed heavier with every passing hour. The chamber, once alive with shouts, growls, and clashing pride, now carried only the low hum of the energy conduits and the faint rustle of uneasy movements. No one wanted to be the first to speak. To break the quiet now was to reveal weakness, and weakness was death to an empire. Yet death was already seeping in through the cracks. The human remained where she had always been, calm, centered, unshaken. Her stillness had become unbearable. Every twitch of her hand, every shift of her gaze carried more gravity than entire speeches from emperors and queens. She was not forcing words anymore, she was letting the silence do her work. Letting fear whisper the truths they could no longer deny. Finally, one of the emperor's generals stood. His scales caught the dim light, shimmering faintly, but there was no strength in his movement. He looked not at his emperor but at the table itself, as though afraid to meet the ruler's eyes. His voice was low, gravelly. "We have lost too much. Our fleets bleed in the void, our colonies crumble. Our people," he paused, his claws curling tight. "Our people grow restless. They no longer chant your name with pride. They whisper it with fear. Fear cannot feed them. Fear cannot rebuild what is gone." The emperor's claws raked against his throne, the sound sharp and cutting. His eyes blazed, but behind that fire was a flicker of something worse, uncertainty. He wanted to roar, to strike his general down where he stood. But he could see the others shifting, the ripple of agreement in their stances. If he punished one, he risked exposing all. And he could not afford that. Not now. The queen leaned forward, her mandibles clicking in cruel amusement. "So the mighty empire cracks first. How fitting. Perhaps your generals will surrender before you do." But her laughter faltered as one of her own drones twitched and stepped forward. The motion was small, unplanned, and for a hive it was nearly unthinkable. The drone's mandibles clicked unevenly, a sound not of obedience but of hesitation. The hive grows weary too, my queen. We fight, we die, and yet the stars remain empty. The hive hums with doubt. The queen's many eyes narrowed, her mandibles snapping in fury. You dare speak without command. Her voice was a hiss of venom. But the damage was already done. The ripple through the hive mind spread wider, stronger. The silence of her drones was not as complete as it once was. Something had cracked, even here. The human finally rose to her feet. She did not raise her voice. She did not shout. Her words were steady, sharp, and merciless. Do you see it now? Your power does not slip because of me. It slips because of you. Because you demanded obedience instead of loyalty. Because you built empires on fear and called it strength. But fear rots from within. And now it rots you. Her gaze swept the chamber, meeting every pair of eyes, alien and otherwise. You called me here to negotiate peace. But the truth is clear. You were already losing. You did not invite me to save your people. You invited me because some part of you already knew. The emperor's breath came heavy, his fists clenched tight. The queen's mandibles twitched furiously, her drones restless and uneven. Around them, the neutral delegates leaned forward, waiting. The tension was unbearable now, stretched thin as a blade's edge. The human took another step forward, her voice quiet, but it struck harder than any weapon. The question is not whether you surrender. The question is who among you admits it first. The words sank into the silence like a stone into still water, and the ripples spread everywhere. The emperor's generals shifted again, some avoiding his eyes, others lowering their heads. The queen's drones clicked nervously, their hive mind no longer a perfect, obedient chorus but a dissonant hum filled with unease. The chamber was no longer ruled by two empires. It was ruled by fear. And fear was no longer their weapon. It belonged to her. The dawn was near. And with it, the breaking point. The first light of dawn slipped through the high windows of the chamber, casting long streaks of pale gold across the polished stone. The night had dragged on like a battle with no end, but now the stars faded and the truth could no longer be hidden. Every ruler, every general, every delegate sat in heavy silence, their faces drawn, their eyes tired. Pride had carried them through the darkness. But pride had limits, and those limits had been reached. The human stood where she had risen hours before, her figure framed by the glow of the rising sun. She did not look tired. She did not look beaten. She looked like the only one who still had strength to give. And in that silence, the empires saw what they had refused to see: she had outlasted them. The emperor was the first to break. His claws dug into the armrests of his throne, the stone cracking under his grip. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, his golden eyes burning not with fire but with something far more painful. Resignation. He stared at the generals who would no longer meet his gaze, at the advisers who shifted uneasily, at the hall that no longer belonged to him. Slowly, painfully, he lowered his head. My fleets are broken. My people are weary. My empire, his voice cracked, and he forced the words out like poison. My empire will stand down. The chamber erupted in whispers, some shocked, some relieved, some triumphant. The emperor, who had ruled with an iron claw for centuries, had spoken the words no one thought possible. He had surrendered. The queen's mandibles twitched violently. For a moment, fury filled her, and she slammed one of her clawed hands against the armrest of her throne. Coward, she hissed at him. Your weakness will stain your name for all time. But even as she spat her venom, her drones shifted again. Their mandibles clicked in uneven rhythm, their movements restless. The hive's hum wavered, uncertain. She felt it deep in her mind, the ripple of rebellion. The dream of peace, faint but growing. Her eyes darted to the human, standing calm in the center of it all. Those eyes, steady and unshaken, cut into her like no weapon ever had. The queen's breath came hard, her chest rising and falling. At last, her many eyes closed, and the sound of her mandibles slowed into bitter stillness. The hive will cease the war. The words were a hiss of defeat, low and venomous, but final. A silence deeper than any before fell upon the chamber. The two empires, who had drowned the stars in fire for generations, had spoken the unthinkable. They had surrendered. Not to each other. Not to fleets or armies. But to a single fragile human who had walked into their hall alone. The neutral delegates sat in stunned awe, some with mouths open, others bowing their heads as though in reverence. Generals who once roared with defiance now stared at the floor, their pride broken. The human did not smile. She only gave a single nod, her voice calm, even in this moment of impossible triumph. Then it is done. The war ends here. The words carried through the hall like the strike of a great bell, final and undeniable. The emperor closed his eyes, his claws still trembling. The queen remained still, her mandibles twitching in frustration but offering no further protest. Around them, the chamber seemed to exhale, the crushing weight of endless conflict lifting, if only slightly. The human stood alone in the light of dawn, the silent figure who had ended a war without raising a single weapon. The empires had bowed, not because she had forced them, but because she had revealed what they already feared. Their strength was not endless. Their rule was not eternal. And even giants could fall when faced with truth. As the sun rose higher, spilling its light across the chamber, the human turned and began to walk away. Every eye followed her, not with hatred, not even with anger, but with something none of them could explain. Fear. Respect. And the quiet realization that history had changed forever in that single night.